President Park Geun-hye returns from her trip to the UAE and is trying to name new names for her cabinet, holding it responsible for the ferry disaster. South Korea's Cardinal Andrew Yeom Soo-jung pays a visit to the inter-Korean business complex in North Korea, a first for a Catholic cardinal. And a day after declaring martial law, the Thai military holds a meeting Wednesday with key parties involved in the country's political unrest. Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I am Kang Chae-ri. President Park Geun-hye returned home earlier today from her trip to the UAE, but that doesn't mean rest time for her. The top office says she has no official schedule for the next couple of days, and she's likely to use that time to pick a new prime minister, kicking off a major cabinet shakeup. Hwang Ji-hye has our top story.
When President Park apologized this week for the government's poor response to the ferry disaster, she chose not to mention her plans to shake up the cabinet. But as she told the families of the victims late last week, follow-up measures to the accident, including a reshuffle, are expected to speed up in the coming days. Pundits are carefully looking at who will be the president's candidate for prime minister, with the current prime minister Chung Won set to resign to take responsibility for the government's lax response to the ferry disaster. They say the appointment of a new prime minister will mark the starting point of the cabinet shakeup. Speculation is rife that the nomination of a new prime minister could come as early as this week, as it's already been almost a month since Chung offered to step down. Those held most responsible for the poor handling of the disaster, the ministers of Oceans and Fisheries, Public Administration, and Education, are most likely to face the chop, but there are growing calls for a clean sweep. Ruling and opposition party lawmakers are demanding the entire cabinet as well as senior officials at the presidential office step down. Pundits say President Park's new government lineup will affect how the public evaluates the sincerity of her apology and will play a key role in whether she wins back public sentiment. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
And as for the latest on the investigation into the ferry disaster and those believed responsible, with an arrest warrant in hand, authorities have finally entered the religious compound of the owner of the ferry operator, Yoo Byung-an, but not much success in finding him just yet. Park Ji-won tells us more.
Prosecutors and police finally made their way into the religious compound in Anseong, Gyeonggi-do province at about noon on Wednesday to execute an arrest warrant for Yoo Byung-an, the practical owner of the Seoul ferry operator. Hundreds of members of Yoo's religious cult, who have been surrounding the estate for the past few days as human shields, allowed only investigating prosecutors in. Investigators searching for the 73-year-old Yoo inside the 230,000 square meter compound have seen no sign of him, and they suspect that he may be hiding elsewhere, like at the home of one of his believers. So they began zeroing in on the homes of Yoo's believers and are conducting undercover operations to find him. Prosecutors are also trying to find evidence inside the compound in relation to criminal charges against the Yoo family, as they've been granted a search and seizure warrant. Wednesday's operation came after Yoo had ignored previous orders by prosecutors to show up for questioning over embezzlement, tax evasion, and malpractice charges. The authorities believe there may be some causal link there with the ferry operators' lack of investment in safety drills and personnel management. Prosecutors are also trying to bring in Yoo Dae-gyun, the eldest son of Yoo Byung-an, on charges of tax evasion and embezzlement of funds from company affiliates owned by the Yoo family. He was last seen at Incheon International Airport buying a one-way ticket to France 3 days after the ferry accident happened last month. However, as he was already banned from travel by the authorities, he didn't board a plane. Since then, his whereabouts have been unknown. Regarding Yoo's other children staying in foreign countries who haven't responded to prosecutors' orders for questioning, The authorities are trying to get them extradited through cooperation with other countries. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
Just 2 weeks to go until Koreans cast their ballots for the local elections, and recent polls suggest voters living in key regions at least are warming to the main opposition party. Kim Young-gil tells us more.
The effect of the government's poor handling of the Seoul ferry disaster is being reflected in recent polling, which shows that the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy is gaining support in Seoul, Incheon, and Gyeonggi-do province. According to a poll conducted this week by TNS Korea on more than 14,000 likely voters, the ruling Saenuri Party's candidate for Seoul Mayor, Chung Mong-jun, is more than 15 points behind incumbent Mayor Park Won-soon, who was at 51% support. It's a similar story in the city of Incheon, where the ruling party mayoral candidate Yoo Jung-bok is trailing incumbent Song Young-gil of the opposition party by more than 10 percentage points. The race for governor of Gyeonggi-do province is much tighter. Just 0.9 percentage points separate Saenuri candidate Nam Kyung-pil and opposition candidate Kim Jin-pyo in the TNS Korea polling. All three local races are considered significant on the national stage, as the three areas boast about half of Korea's total population. Earning victories in these races can give a party a full head of steam heading into future legislative and presidential elections. In other important local races, such as in the conservative stronghold city of Busan and in the liberal stronghold city of Gwangju, the polling fell more along party lines. According to a survey conducted by the National Election Commission last week, 55.8% of respondents said they would vote on election day, up 1 percentage point from the 2010 local elections. Campaigning is set to begin on Thursday, and public safety has emerged as the hot-button issue in light of April's ferry disaster. Kim Young-gil, ARIRANG News.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chae-ri for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8, every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to persuade. South Korean Cardinal Andrew Yeom Soo-jung made history on Wednesday morning of becoming the very first Korean Roman Catholic leader to cross the inter-Korean border into the north. And with Pope Francis scheduled to come to Seoul in August, expectations are high as to whether he will be the very first pope to visit North Korea. Hwang Sung-hee reports.
Cardinal Andrew Yeom Soo-jung became the first Korean Roman Catholic leader to ever cross the inter-Korean border on Wednesday. The trip comes amid escalating tensions on the peninsula, but after touring the factory zone and meeting with South Korean Catholics there, Cardinal Yeom said he saw hope for the two Koreas.
By visiting the Kaesong Industrial Complex, where the South and the North must live together, I saw hope that the two Koreas can overcome their pain and sadness. If goodwill people try with an honest heart, I think we can secure peace on the peninsula.
While there were questions on whether the trip was political, the Cardinal's delegation said they had no contact with North Korean officials. Cardinal Yeom, who had been vocal about his desire to hold Mass at the Kaesong complex, instead prayed with South Korean Catholics for the two Koreas. He had planned to hold Mass at the Joint Industrial Park last December, but it was scrapped at the last minute, following the execution of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's uncle Jang Sung-taek. The Cardinal's trip comes 3 months before Pope Francis is scheduled to arrive in South Korea for a visit, fueling speculation that the Holy Father could also make a stop in the north. Pope Francis, who has shown a great deal of interest in peace and reconciliation between the two Koreas, is expected to deliver a message for the entire peninsula when he visits Seoul in August. However, the Korean Catholic Church said the Cardinal's visit was arranged upon request by a group of South Korean Catholics last year, and that the Pope has no plans to visit North Korea. For now, the attention is on whether Cardinal Yeom's rare trip will contribute in thawing inter-Korean relations. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News, Paju.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's push to restore his country's right to collective self-defense or to come to the aid of an ally under attack has certainly gotten the attention of neighboring countries. Tokyo says the change is necessary to defend itself, but others are not as sure, and experts are wondering aloud what the fallout may be. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
The opinions on Japan's push to restore its right to collective self-defense are varied and strong. A senior researcher in the United States, weighing in on the latest developments, said South Korea, Japan, and the United States need to hold trilateral talks on the matter, particularly regarding the range of influence Tokyo could have on the Korean peninsula after the right to collective self-defense takes effect. Larry Nish of the Congressional Research Service said South Korea is undoubtedly against Japan's push, and that the key issue was determining how much is Washington willing to compromise with Seoul on the matter. Even inside Japan, there is resistance. The Japanese daily Asahi Shimbun conducted a public opinion poll last month on Prime Minister Abe's push to expand the role of Japan's self-defense forces. 63% of Japanese people polled were against the move. Just 29% were for it, leaving questions about whether Abe will be able to move the public and politicians. Mindy Kotler, the director of the U.S.-based research center Asia Policy Point, said Abe is seeking to reinterpret Japan's pacifist constitution too hastily. She pointed out that the administration is not fit to handle the task as they have been unable or unwilling so far to resolve historical differences with neighboring countries. That said, most sources within Washington say Japan's collective self-defense reform will strengthen the nation's alliance with the U.S. and in turn enhance security on the Korean peninsula. Bruce Klingler, a senior research fellow for Northeast Asia at the Heritage Foundation, says without Japan's support, it will be impossible to defend Seoul in the event of an armed clash between the two Koreas. He added that it's imperative to bolster defenses to counter threats from Pyongyang and Beijing. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping have promised to forge closer bilateral ties amid tensions with the United States. The leaders met in Shanghai Tuesday on the opening day of their joint military drills that are likely to draw disapproval from South Korea as they overlap with Seoul's recently expanded air defense identification zone. Shin Se-min with this report.
Meeting in Shanghai Tuesday, Presidents Xi and Putin agreed to strengthen their economic and military ties. They also held in-depth talk about North Korea's nuclear and missile programs. Praising the tightening military ties between the two sides, President Putin said he was convinced Moscow and Beijing could forge a strong strategic partnership and that bilateral military cooperation was developing very well. Putin's visit to China coincided with the beginning of the two countries' joint naval exercises, Joint Sea 2014. The drills have raised red flags in Seoul as they overlap with South Korea's expanded air defense identification zone. Neither Moscow nor Beijing notified the South Korean government prior to its announcement. It's the first time an international military exercise has taken place within Korean waters since the expansion of the air defense zone last December. On the business front, the two leaders failed to narrow their differences on a natural gas supply agreement worth of $400 billion. A 30-year contract between the Russian state-controlled fuel supplier and Chinese National Petroleum Corporation was left unsigned as both sides couldn't agree on a price at which Russia would supply gas. Moscow wants to find new buyers for its gas outside of Europe. This is because U.S. allies in Europe have imposed sanctions against Moscow for its annexation of Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula. In regards to the security situation on the Korean Peninsula, both sides said they were concerned about North Korea's nuclear program and the simmering political and military tensions between the two Koreas. China and Russia stressed the long-stalled six-party talks on North Korea's denuclearization are the only effective way of reaching a deal everyone is happy with. They called on all parties to do more to secure peace and stability in the region. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
The Korean government says it's spending extra $7.6 billion by the end of next month to perk up domestic demand, subdued even more because of the April ferry disaster. This came during a policy meeting with the ruling Saenuri Party Wednesday, where Finance Minister Hyun Woo-seok said the move is part of government efforts to make sure the ferry disaster does not derail economic recovery. The government is also considering tax breaks and other financial support for the tourism, transportation, and lodging industries hurt badly by the disaster. The International Monetary Fund has given Korea's banking sector a vote of confidence, according to a stress test reported in its Financial System Stability Assessment. The IMF says Korean banks are quote-unquote resilient to financial risks, citing improved capitalization following the financial crisis in 2008. However, the agency did warn that the country's non-banking sector is increasingly vulnerable, saying it lacked readiness to deal with risks. The IMF recommended stricter inspections to improve transparency and stronger penalties in the financial sector. The report also called for political neutrality for Korea's Financial Services Commission as well as Financial Supervisory Service. Thailand's acting prime minister has proposed a date for general elections after the military imposed martial law across the kingdom yesterday. With more on this story, we now go to Paul E. at the News Center. Paul, what's the situation like on the streets of the capital city there?
Well, Thailand's military said it enacted martial law to restore peace and order, and it appears for now they've accomplished that in Bangkok. But many are saying it's merely the calm before the storm, as tensions continue to rise between pro- and anti-government demonstrators. Thailand's interim government has called for fresh general elections on August 3rd. This comes after the Election Commission last week said it was logistically impossible to hold elections by the previously set July deadline. Thailand's caretaker prime minister said he would meet with the electoral body to finalize a date as early as next week. Meanwhile, Thailand's army chief, General Prayut Chan-o-chan, has summoned the leaders of rival political groups and parties in an effort to find a peaceful solution to the political crisis.
We have invited many groups and many factions who play a major role in the country to send 5 representatives to discuss a way out. The groups include the caretaker Senate Speaker, the chairman of the Election Commission, the head of the Pheu Thai Party, the head of the Democrat Party, the secretary of People's Democratic Reform Committee, and the chairman of the United Front for Democracy Against Dictatorship.
However, doubts are growing that an early election could be held smoothly despite military troops patrolling the streets. Thailand remains deeply divided after months of violent protests that have left 28 people dead and over 700 injured.
I see, and more violence in Nigeria, this time twin bomb attacks in a central city, killing at least over 100 people, and authorities are warning that the number could go up. Paul, what do we know? Do we know who is behind these attacks?
Well, although no one has claimed responsibility, the Islamist militant group Boko Haram has yet again been blamed for the blasts. The extremist group has also been accused of killing 17 people in a separate attack in northeastern Nigeria near a village where hundreds of schoolgirls were abducted last month. Our Yulian has more on the latest on these attacks against the African country.
2 car bombs exploded in Nigeria's central city of Jos on Tuesday, killing at least 118 local civilians. One ripped through the center of a busy market. Another half an hour later outside a nearby hospital, killing some rescue workers. A local official says the death toll could rise further as rescue teams continue to recover bodies from the smoldering debris. It's not yet clear who's responsible for the attack, but Boko Haram is the prime suspect. The militant group has been carrying out a series of bomb attacks across the center of Nigeria, trying to overthrow the government and create an Islamic state. If Boko Haram is to blame, Tuesday's double bomb blast would make it their deadliest single attack in 5 years. President Goodluck Jonathan issued a statement late Tuesday expressing sympathy for the victims and reassuring the public that the government remains committed to winning the war against terror. Terrorism in Nigeria has been under the international spotlight ever since Boko Haram kidnapped more than 200 schoolgirls back in mid-April. The girls who remain unaccounted for are reportedly being threatened to be auctioned off to become wives of militants. The campaign to get those girls back continues in Nigeria.
There is hope. There is a lot of hope. We believe the girls are safe. We believe the girls are alive. And we believe with the tremendous support the Nigerian military is getting, we believe that the girls will be rescued and returned home.
But fear is rising. As evident by this latest attack, Boko Haram is becoming increasingly vicious in their campaign for an Islamic State. More than 1,000 people are believed to have been killed by the militant group this year. Yurian, ARIRANG News.
And moving on to Libya now, a deadly rocket attack has reportedly killed at least 2 people in the capital city of Tripoli. Paul, what's the latest on the attack?
Well, rescue crews are still working at the site in the southwestern district of Tripoli. Officials say 2 African migrant workers died in the rocket blast, while 2 others have been wounded. Firefighters were continuing to battle a fire at a nearby carpet factory and other buildings as of early Wednesday. Local residents also reported gunfire being exchanged and several other explosions. However, authorities say the situation is now under control.
Yesterday, at midnight, we heard explosions, so we rushed outside to see what was happening. We found out that our shops were burnt out, and we evacuated 2 wounded people.
Meanwhile, Libya's election commission said the country will push forward with the parliamentary elections on June 25th amid fears of civil war. Tripoli has accused the renegade General Khalifa Haftar of trying to topple the government after militia groups attacked the parliamentary building on Sunday. Haftar has denied the charge. The elections would be the first since the ousting of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011.
And finally, Paul, let's turn to Brazil. Another waves of protests have erupted in the city of Sao Paulo with less than a month to go before the country hosts the World Cup. Are we seeing another symptom of rising anti-World Cup sentiment, or is there another reason behind this civil unrest?
Well, there's 2 main protest groups that have been marching through Brazil's largest city. The first group is Sao Paulo City Bus Union that is striking over higher wages and better working conditions. Public transportation was paralyzed throughout the city on Wednesday as bus employees, drivers, and conductors walked out on the job. The other group that has joined the growing protest is Brazil's landless workers movement. About 2,000 homeless protesters marched to the office of a construction company which owns land occupied by the movement in recent weeks. There has been growing outrage after the final bill of the hosting of the World Cup came to an estimated $60 billion.
We occupied the office, and then there was a commission that received us. They said that tomorrow the president of the construction company would receive us so that we could try and negotiate. This will be tomorrow.
Many Brazilians have accused the government of misplacing its priorities as public services remain underfunded, while some 11 million people are living in slum-like conditions in Sao Paulo alone. Nonetheless, the World Cup opening match will kick off on June 12th. Cherry?
All right, Paul, thank you very much for that update, and we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours. Weather-wise, it was a beautiful day here in Seoul, and Michelle Park is joining us to give us more information. Michelle, the lunar calendar says today was the start of summer.
That's right, although it's been feeling like summer already, which started days ago with highs reaching up into the 30s. Now, as you can see, it's generally looking clear over the nation, but you may see some fog in the southern province tonight, so those of you driving, please be careful. Now, tomorrow we can expect another warm and sunny day nationwide, but there will be sporadic showers in the regions along the eastern coast. Now, going over to our readings, we'll start off the Thursday morning at 14 before reaching up to 28 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will peak up to 31 and 24 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops out at 24, Dokdo at 15, while Mangungang tops out at 22. Well, that's all I have for now. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you, Teddy.
All right, Michelle, thank you very much for that. And that ends this edition of ARIRANG News at 8. Thanks for watching.